At its very core, drug science must remain independent. This means we don't accept sponsorships. It's with the support of the drug science community we're able to do this and make the podcast in the first place. If you're able to become a drug science community member and support the show, you too will be supporting the dissemination of evidence-based drug policies. Without you, none of this would be possible. For anybody interested, there's a link in the show notes. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the Drug Science Podcast with me, David Nutt. Here we're bringing together experts and activists for a rational, honest and informed conversation about drugs. Welcome everyone to this Drug Science Podcast. Today we go to a new continent. We're going to Australia with Dr. Margaret Ross. Hello Marge, how are you?
Hello. I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me. But I have to warn your listeners, it is 2 a.m. here in Australia.
Oh, that's really kind of you to have made the effort. Really kind.
Such is our love for you, Dave. I was never going to knock this back, but it's this could go down any number of existential rabbit holes at 2 a.m.
Okay, well, I guess we better kick on to make sure you don't completely fade.
Exactly. Keep me in check. Buckle up, children. Here we go.
But you've got your mission, I guess, haven't you? You've got your mission to keep you going. So tell us about your mission and what your vision is for psychedelic therapy in Australia.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm a clinical psychologist. I work in cancer and palliative care and have done for the last 12 years, the last 10 years in hospital at St Vincent's in Melbourne. And I think my mission came about as being, I guess, a frustrated clinician insofar as seeing so many of our patients that just weren't responding to our treatments for psychological distress and existential distress. And so we were really looking for emerging and novel treatments. I had seen the work that had been coming out of Johns Hopkins, NYU, and Peter Gass's work as well with LSD, absolutely convinced someone would bring it to Australia, and nobody did. And so some years prior to sort of getting into oncology and palliative care, I had a research fellow position and had been working in clinical trials. So I knew what I had to do, but I thought I'd sort of left my research years behind me. But then Psychedelics actually pulled me back in. I threw my hat in the ring, was sort of warned it was going to be a difficult slog because all of the previous attempts in the last decade in Australia had been rejected in terms of trying to get psychedelic research off the ground. So we were prepared for maybe not good news, but we worked really hard, and Martin Williams from Prism was integral in terms of helping us get that up and schooling us up as a team. So yeah, put the protocol in and here we are.
So well, tell us what you're planning to do and where you are in your plans.
Yeah, so we're currently running a phase 2 study with our palliative care patients who have depression or anxiety as a result of having a life-threatening illness.
Right.
So we're aiming to recruit. We're currently recruiting. We're aiming to recruit 40 participants, and we're treating them with psilocybin-assisted therapy. And there are 2 dose sessions. First one being RCT, so they have a 50-50 chance of getting niacin or the active psilocybin. And then several weeks later, we actually offer people an open label dose so that everyone has the opportunity to have the full experience of the treatment, and we follow them up for 6 months post that dose.
Yeah, that's a nice design. That's a proven design, isn't it? It's
Yeah. We think and it's not uncommon in cancer actually, whereby because I think ethically we felt to have an open label extension arm. We wanted the RCT obviously to be able to sort of contribute to the science and demonstrate with the gold standard RCT, but at the same time we didn't feel right about going, oh sorry, you got the niacin, see ya.
Yeah.
Particularly with patients who had such enormous suffering as well, which we sort of saw as clinicians. So I think we straddle 2 worlds as clinician and researcher. So we're deeply embedded in the palliative care, palliative medicine team and oncology teams.
So hang on, let's talk a little bit more detail about it's a standard 25 milligram psilocybin dose.
Yep, standard 25 milligram dose. And we have 3 prep sessions prior to.
Oh, okay. 3 prep.
So we spend quite a bit of time with our patients.
Yeah.
Because I think also, medically, we're very keen to understand the narrative of not only their life, but also the narrative of their illness. And we need to get a good sense of them even before we sort of get into the prep work. So we've put a big emphasis on those 3 sessions.
And hang on those 3 sessions, Marge, is that one therapist or 2?
It's actually 2 therapists. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of investment. Well done. Yeah, well done for raising the money.
Well, to be honest, we're not unfortunately a well-funded study in that regard. There's, as you know, there's not a lot of coin going around, and a lot of it we're actually absorbing in kind. We have a very dedicated team, and St Vincent's has absorbed much of the cost with Prism, promising some funding as well that's come from Vajradhara Institute.
Have you ever read my paper, Guerrilla Psychopharmacology?
No, but I need to hear this by the sound.
So we've been doing psychedelic research for 15 years now. Only one grant in those 15 years has come from the government. And almost only one. And most has come from philanthropists and charities. But I wrote a paper for the British Journal of Pharmacology a few years ago called Guerrilla Psychopharmacology, because almost everything we have done because we have volunteers who believe, who sacrifice their time and their efforts to help us out.
It is so true. Like that, and that's all we do. We're sort of, bootlegging the compassion of our colleagues, and so we've got all of our study doctors who are squeezing people into their clinics so that they can do a medical screen for our patients who are coming in. And I've had a fabulous boss, and my 2 sort of directors, and both co-principal investigators on the study, with enormous interest in the work as well, who basically said you can take your time off the ward in order to do this.
So you've got support from the palliative care team and from the oncology team, right?
Absolutely. There's been enormous buy-in, and the reasons for that are pretty evident when you work in this field, because it's not only that there's that existential distress that they experience, depression and anxiety, but when they have that psychological distress that's not responding to the usual treatments, it can augment their physical symptoms of disease. So, it augments their experience of pain and nausea and sleep disturbance and so forth. So there's a big, they see the benefit in being able to access this refractory distress.
Yeah. Are you doing 3 prep sessions because you think that they're older people, or maybe they're not older people, but they're particularly traumatized by the diagnosis? It takes them longer to get their head around what's needed?
There's a hell of a lot of trauma actually in cancer, and in I think even just going through, quite invasive investigations, and having your world turned absolutely upside down when you're told you have cancer. That's that C word. So, it brings you face to face with your mortality, and everything you think you know about life is all of a sudden just kind of, these carefully stratified layers of what you think life is about, like a sandwich. All of a sudden wiped out in a wave. And so people just feel completely dismantled by it. So we need to kind of get a sense of well, first of all, what they know, about the treatment. Once we've got their, do a good formulation and history, and as I say, the narrative of their life, narrative of their illness, but also to kind of orient them to treatment as well. They're often bewildered by it. There's so many investigations that they go through, and treatments which can leave them quite disfigured. It can really change and alter their body. And
of course.
There's enormous assault on one's sense of identity, I think, when you go through this. So. And people can feel very reduced to their illness.
Yeah, quite. Yes. To what it is, that's right. It's just that lump inside them that sort of dominates everything, doesn't it?
That's it. And they sort of, and their whole life is sort of dictated by the, medical appointments. And so all of a sudden they sort of feel like they're a set of pathology results, and they're so desperate to be seen and regarded. It's important for us that we want to take that time to spend with them and kind of go, this is actually more holistic. This is about you. And yes, you happen to have cancer, but who else are you? Because, as you're aware, any number of kind of life wounds and conflicts can emerge in
well, they tend to come back, don't they?
Absolutely. So we felt, and also it was a first for us. I think it was very important that we demonstrated to our ethics, our IRB, that we would be, spending adequate time screening really thoroughly, and also preparing people and I guess mitigating any risk of adverse events. So from that point of view, and we know that there's movement in other studies, including your own, to try and reduce that, because I think that there's certain advantage in having a more packageable, I guess, or an accessible treatment that's appealing to, I guess, health systems. But I think at least for a first hit, we really needed to make sure it was going to be comprehensive.
No. Well, I think you're absolutely right. It's better that you overtreat than undertreat at the beginning. Absolutely. And then it's a 25 milligram dose
Mm-hmm.
And then what's the follow-up look like?
So we've got we have 3 sessions prior of prep session. Then we see them the next day after their dose. Then we see them 3 weeks later, and then we see them again the day before their second dose, which is also sort of their several week follow-up period. But it also functions as their day before their second dose.
So your primary outcome is how many weeks? Is that 3 weeks or 6 weeks? I can't work that out.
It's actually 6 weeks. Yeah.
It's 6 weeks. So the target is to have a significant improvement.
Yeah.
Psilocybin versus niacin is 6 weeks.
Yeah. We've got a really conservative statistician. So like we're going for big numbers, but I think we're confident in the reductions that had been demonstrated in previous studies. And while I'm on the subject as well, huge congratulations to yourself and Robin and the team for your publication last week in New England.
Well, talk about conservative statisticians. Boy, that's a seriously conservative journal. But they almost made us say it didn't work. But anyway, I think the data showed it did rather well.
Data, you can see it, but I completely understand where you're coming from. And I'm sort of going, oh God, are we going to have something like that?
What are your outcomes, Margaret? I mean, what is your primary outcome?
Well, we're looking at depression and anxiety, and we're hoping for 50% reduction in depression and anxiety as measured on Beck depression and state train anxiety inventory.
Okay, super. So you're actually going, I think I wish we'd gone for 50%. As opposed to the mean. Because the variability we discovered, yes, in our paper, it was the variability that we found the psilocybin group, almost everyone did brilliantly apart from 3 people who didn't. And that shifted the nature of it was non-parametric really, but we were forced to do parametric statistics. So it was.
It's a beast of a thing when you are forced to kind of do, various parametric measures, which really, and it's a non-parametric. So but I think if anyone worth their salt can read that paper, they can see what you have done and what you've been able to demonstrate. So congratulations.
Thank you. Speech spreading the word. So what are you targeting? 20? Did you say 20 in each group? Was it?
Yes, for the first phase, and then I guess that the benefit of the study design means that we can then look and see, particularly for that group that had the psilocybin in the first hit as well, to sort of see if we've got more efficacy with 1 or 2 dose indication.
Oh, so hang on, let me get it clear, Margaret. So that at 6 weeks they can have a second dose.
Yeah,
they're not switched to niacin.
No,
they can carry it. Oh, that's an interesting design. So they
open label for everyone. So we then have. So we've got the 20 in the placebo, 20 in the active, and then 40 in the open label. Well, we haven't had anyone turn it down yet. So from the second dose, we do a 6-week follow-up. 6-month follow-up. Yeah.
So when's it going to finish?
Oh God! Well, given for the same reasons that you articulate, because we're really kind of working within a small team and working within the limits, I guess that people have. We're hoping for end of next year. Mindful that we want things to be contemporaneous, and COVID absolutely stuffed us, and probably did for yourselves as well. But we had very heavy directives.
You had lockdown, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. So basically, our psilocybin arrived in December 2019. We started January 2020, and then by March 2020, mid 2020, we were shut down, and we weren't able to deliver the treatment because of the directives that we have in our hospital in place. We couldn't we couldn't provide more than 45 minutes treatment in a confined space without being in level 4 PPE. Yeah. And we were a little worried about what that was going to look like. So
it's not great for therapy, is it? Yes.
I was reminded of the Rick Strassman experiences for the DMT and, the whole,
yes. You see the aliens are coming there.
The aliens are coming with their anal probes, look out. So, we were mindful of that. We went, we better not do that. But also we weren't actually allowed to either because we were working with, a group of people that were immunocompromised. So people couldn't come to the hospital unless it was absolutely essential treatment. So we were shelved. So we're hopeful we can get this done and wrap it up maybe end of 2022. Fingers crossed. So
sounds exciting. Well, that sounds actually really rather exciting. Actually, sooner than you think.
Absolutely. I think
time has a habit of whizzing.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. But I think we've had an enormous Funnily enough, we were expecting a little bit more pushback, and we just didn't get it. To be honest, in fact, it went the other way. We've had enormous support.
Do you think that's just St Vincent's because it's a kind of progressive university, or do you think it's some change in Australia?
Well, we were expecting it because we're a Catholic hospital. We were expecting more pushback.
Yeah.
And we didn't get it. We were sort of primed and ready with all these different arguments and various things that they just didn't arrive. And in fact, it went the other way, and we got such enormous positive support from the public. That was a useful metric. I think things are shifting. From a sociocultural point of view, things are shifting. And, I think we're seeing more and more of that. I don't know if you know, the Australian government has just recently announced that there's a $15 million now up for grabs.
Well, yeah, I want to talk to you about what is happening in Australia in a little while. But let's just stick to this. It's interesting. I've always taken the view that perhaps Catholicism is more interested in people's psychology than Protestant. It seems to me Protestantism has been the big bane of all drug laws. It's about never doing anything that might be seen as useful or positive,
Yeah.
Whereas Catholicism always seemed to me a slightly more lenient, more flexible, more pragmatic kind of.
Yeah, and they're big fans of alcohol. I say that as a battered Catholic, actually, from back, but being raised in a very Catholic kind of household and Catholic schools and all that sort of thing. Yeah, the Catholics are fond of their alcohol, so they have their vices. I don't know whether they're more flexible. Certainly for us, we were, the hospital were tremendously supportive, and our ethics committee they're very progressive. They knew of this research and were very, very supportive. The other thing is as well, I think we had a definite advantage applying in a hospital rather than a university setting.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we were, when they were sitting down for their ethics committee meetings and they were looking at, phase 1 targeted therapies or immunotherapies that could, potentially hasten cancer and accelerate cancer growth and hasten someone's death. And that was being approved, looking at dosing studies in phase 1. This was an easy sell comparatively. So
yes, that's right. You're not killing someone. You actually might make you might make the last few months of life a lot better, rather than they're not going to be vomiting even more than usual.
Exactly. Or
that's a good point.
It was actually really helpful when I think we actually obtained an independent toxicologist report to sort of say this is actually a really safe profile, because we're mindful that people are still carrying old and outdated kind of ideas about psilocybin, and we just went, God, it makes people jump out of windows, all garbage. It can, if you've got a supported, and really thorough treatment protocol, this can be quite a profound treatment for people.
Yeah, and I think it's very clever that you're coming in from the palliative care, because palliative care is about care, and this is about care, whereas cancer is about biology and killing things, isn't it?
I think that the beauty of palliative medicine, and to a certain extent cancer as well, particularly from the WHO definition of palliative care and what constitutes good palliative care, it includes spiritual and psychological care of the patient and their family. So it's not taboo to talk about spirituality in palliative care. So that was useful for us, but also it's the area where stigma recedes from the most. If somebody who's, facing a life-threatening illness or really advanced cancer, if that's going to help them, people won't say no to that, or they're less likely to say no to that. I think we kind of leverage that anyway. But the science spoke much louder than we did.
Yes, I'll just share an anecdote with you, which is I went to medical school. I went to Guy's Hospital in 1972, and there was a professor of clinical pharmacology who actually ended up being my consultant for 6 months when I was a resident. He was giving us a lecture on pain and dying. And he gave the lecture. And I said, "Oh, you haven't mentioned the use of LSD to help people die peacefully and comfortably." And he looked at me and he said, "You'll never work here, nut." No. He said, "Well, we don't know much about that, and we don't talk about that. It's an illegal drug." And I thought, okay, that's obviously got to be my life's ambition. So you're actually, Marge, you're fulfilling my life's ambition, and I am really pleased.
I love it.
I'm really pleased that you're doing
my
it.
God, I'm so inspired by you. It's not even funny. But the story of Eric Cast using LSD with cancer patients, which was fantastic. Not altogether ethical, but his findings were so fascinating, and here we are as a result of this.
Well, hello, listeners. Apologies for the interruption to the show, but I have a very exciting piece of news to share with you. In December, I will be releasing my brand new book, The Brain and Mind Made Simple. Now, this is a book which has been developed from lectures I gave for drug science over the last couple of years before COVID. they went down very well. I discovered that people were very interested in their brain and very interested in their mind, and also interested in the way that drugs, both legal and illegal, cast light on those and affect them. So if you're interested in your brain at all, this book will take you from the very beginnings of, when we're back in the primordial days, when the first animals were developing a nervous system, right through into the current ways in which we can study the brain with imaging, and also give you insights into what goes wrong in the brain. And there are chapters on all the different ways in which processes of consciousness and the content of consciousness can change with disorders such as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. And also a big section on sleep as well, because that's a fascinating component of brain function, which is not well understood. Now, the book will support drug science in the same way as my previous book, Not Uncut, did. And to celebrate the launch of the book, we're hosting a book launch in London. And this will be one of the first real-life events I've done in the past 18 months. And we're very excited to see listeners of the podcast in person at this event. So if you can make your way to London, we'd love to see you there. And of course, you'll be able to buy the book and you'll get a signed copy from me. But obviously, many of the podcast listeners are from overseas, and we don't want you to miss out. So we'll also host an online book launch as well. If you follow us on the website, you'll know when that's going to be. And again, if you join our community, you'll be able to get special signed copies and also other access to other drug science events I'm taking part in. So now, back to the show. Yes, well, I'm glad you mentioned that the WHO have spirituality as part of their ambitions, because they're generally not that interested and receptive to regulatory change in this field. But if we can actually quote their own work in them, maybe they will be.
Absolutely.
But that gets me onto the topic of Australia, which is fascinating. I mean, it seems to me that you've gone through a remarkable almost convulsion in the last couple of years, because I've been sort of helping Australia Mind Medicine argue that psychedelics and MDMA should be in medicine in Australia. And we've got some terrible pushback from the TGA and Australian psychiatrists were, they wrote just a ridiculously negative paper, which is actually so bad. People really couldn't take it seriously. But now you've got the government funding research. So tell me about what's been going on.
Well, yeah, I think there's the government has just announced this $15 million that it's up for grabs with this medical research funding. And, I think that's a really useful metric, because I think that they're aware that the research is showing promise and ultimately it's coming down the pipeline. So they're making provision for that. So I think that there's good signals coming from the government, which mean, they're prepared to put their hand in their pocket and fund.
But is this driven? This is obviously not being driven by Australian psychiatry, because they were really hostile. So who's driving this? Is it you? I mean, or are there politicians, or what's going on?
To be honest, I don't know. But my sense is that not all psychiatrists feel this way. There's certainly a collective of us, in psychology and psychiatry and multidisciplinaries that are really kind of going, we need to start dialoguing about this. There's no room for unscientific bias here, either side. I think the thing certainly for me, one of the things that I had in terms of my strategy, in terms of going, okay, I've got a bloody big thing ahead of me here. How am I going to get this across? Ethics, was that I would talk to people about what I wanted to do, and you get the smirks and the smiles and oh my God, really, and all the mocking and all that came with it. But the science speaks louder than anything, and you cannot ignore that this is happening. And in fact, it's almost embarrassing now if a colleague kind of like, are you aware of what's happening? I think one of the things that's important for us in terms of our dialogue is going, you actually need to be aware of the science here and the safety profile of this. I'm not saying it's for everyone. It would be remiss of me to say that, but in terms of the safety profile here and what it's just showing remarkable promise in these phase 2 studies. Yes, it needs to go to phase 3, and we're aware of that. But I think people can look very out of step with what's actually going on, and it is coming down the pipeline.
So tell me a bit more about, are there patient groups supporting you, or is this mostly driven from the profession?
Well, look, there's a really desperate need, I think, that is coming from the community, I think, in terms of when people aren't responding to treatments. And we get flooded with inquiries, on a daily basis, for people who are desperate for relief from, PTSD or really quite treatment refractory depression and so forth. and many of them, some people have had psychosis and all that kind of thing, and they're just desperate for anything. So we still have a way to go in terms of helping people understand who this is for and who it's, not for at this stage and what we know. But what's propelling this is that we're dialoguing more. I think it's certainly helpful having the research that's coming out. Obviously, there's the Johns Hopkins that was, produced just before Christmas with their depression study, your study that's just come out as well. It all promotes dialogue, and you don't argue with the science. The science is showing us something that we need to take notice of.
Well, that's what I hoped. That's why we did the science.
And we
thought the science was actually, without that, you're back to the claims, and the claims have been problematic in the past.
See, that's where it's fascinating to me, because before all this, and now I had to sort of take a bit of a deep dive into why it was all rescheduled in the first place back in the day. And I sort of emerged out of it kind of confused and bewildered as to how it was like the data was saying something completely different, yet it was just kind of staggering to me.
Well, it's politics, Marty. It's politics.
But it was like,
very much American politics as well.
Exactly. But then this propaganda that came out of that, and it had such an impact on our politics and our sociocultural perspective. So anyway, that was staggering to me, actually, that people could ignore the science. So the fact that we're promoting it and dialoguing about it, but also bringing it to the attention of our regulatory bodies is important.
But I know, because when I worked in Melbourne, I had to be approved by the Victoria Physician Society to be allowed to be a doctor there. And so each state is different. So are states taking different perspectives on this, do you think? I
think that there's different red tape. I know that WA is very, very difficult to get regulatory approval. I have got to say that from my own experience with the Victorian, like our state health, were really helpful and actually quite good at helping us get this through, and in quite a timely way. And in terms of getting our federal licensing and permits, that was all very good. The delays that we actually hit was actually.
Oh, hang on. Before you go on, you have to get two sets of permits. You have to get a state permit and a.
Yeah.
Oh no! What a new.
Yeah, so it's like, oh god. But in saying that, it was actually really, I just didn't get the pushback that we were expecting. The delays that we had were actually about manufacturing.
So where is it coming from then?
UK.
Oh, well, that explains a lot, doesn't it? Yes, this third world country, a long way away from you. Yes.
I think the minute you start dealing with international laws and different ways, shipping and so forth, and you're talking about Schedule 9. So our Schedule 9 is equivalent to your Schedule 1, I believe. Is that?
Yeah.
So the highest. So psilocybin in Australia is the highest level of restriction, which is Schedule 9 under our Drugs and Poisons Act. So when you're dealing with importation of a Schedule 9, that was where the paperwork really, really was like, oh God. But again, we didn't really hit a lot of issue from our internal and our national, but it was more kind of getting it, getting the manufacturing had some delays, and then getting it across from home office getting an export permit.
Home office, yes. No.
I think it will be easier. I think it will be easier going forward. I think it will be easier.
Well, I hope so. So this $15 million, this $15 million, have they decided what they're going to spend it on yet, or is the call still open?
So the calls are still open and will be for some time. Certainly the areas of interest that they're looking at, PTSD, eating disorders, and God, what was the other one? Sorry, it's 2:30 a.m. and I can't remember the other. But so I've got these areas sort of earmarked.
But you've not put in for one yourself. I mean, because I suppose you.
Well, I'm mindful that in lots of ways it's NHMRC grants and whatever else. And I'm actually a very small fish there. I'm not a traditional academic in that way.
Oh, right. I mean, the real scientists are getting to work now.
Exactly. So once we've got 100 plus pubs, but kind of use that to my advantage to begin with. I think because I think a lot of people, who were in academia were very scared to put their head on the chopping block. I didn't have that worry. It wasn't publish or perish for me, because I think if you make one false move in academia, as you know.
We were talking about this wonderful,
the cash.
I mean, you're the first country in the world to actually have basically a tranche of money set aside for psychedelic research, and I've been begging us the Brits to do it, because we were ahead of the game once. Now we're going to be behind because other countries are catching up.
Yeah.
That initiative actually came.
You're still leading in terms of that research. I mean, God, I think we're sort of feeling like we're left for dust. It's going to be, I guess, rolled out the next 3 to 5 years, I believe.
Okay. But is that the science minister or is it health minister? Do you have any sense of where they lobby?
The health minister,
Oh,
yeah.
great.
So, well, look, I think, hats off to Mind Medicines who have actually lobbied for this. They've done a lot of, talking in the public arena about this, which has really raised the profile of that. But, on the back of, I guess, a decade of advocacy and dialogue by organisations like Entheogenesis Australis and PRISM, Psychedelic Research in Science and Medicine. So you've got these people working behind the scenes to really promote that psychedelic compounds does have a place in a medical and therapeutic.
Well, it's been 10 years. I remember, the last time I was two times before I was in Australia, and you guys were just bringing in this law that said you couldn't grow any plant that might be psychoactive in your own back garden. And I'm thinking, you're a continent that's got more psychoactive plants than any in the world. And now you're trying to stop people growing native plants in the garden. This has just gone too far. There is an absurdity to prohibition in the end. Perhaps it just falls apart under its own.
Tell me where it's worked. But the egg on the face there was that, our national flora is the wattle.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Which is dripping.
DMT, that's right.
And you're like, are you joking me?
Burn it all. Destroy all the wattle. Absolutely. Get rid of it. Yeah.
We wouldn't have very much left. But I think, look, I think, there is a shifting sentiment. Certainly that is apparent, particularly in, and I'm speaking anecdotally now, but certainly I think that there's a growing acceptance and a growing interest and curiosity, I think, in the general community and also in the medical and academic communities as well. Because, the science is just too compelling. Yes, they can say it's only preliminary findings, and I would agree, yes, there's more work to be done. But, my God, to quote Ben Sessa, you don't use the word cure in psychiatry. And the results that are coming out are, we're not seeing anything else like it.
No, absolutely,
Nothing
absolutely. Is ketamine available for depression in Australia? Is that?
There's ketamine studies that are going on for depression. Certainly ketamine, we see a lot of ketamine actually in my work in palliative care for pain and as a way of kind of resetting opiate receptors as well for people who've got really difficult to manage pain. So, it's coming down the pipeline. I know I keep saying that, but I'm pretty confident that that's happening. There's still the conservative kind of, and it will take time, for those attitudes to shift. It's not going to shift overnight.
We've been invited, Ben Sessa and I have been invited to give evidence to the TGA in a special hearing. Did you know about this?
Really?
Yes.
Our TGA is going to...
Yes. Wow. Your TGA is having a special hearing because they weren't very comfortable with the evidence they were getting from your local doctors.
Oh, okay.
so we're having a special expert hearing from British experts. Now, of course, they might not like the fact we're foreigners and colonialists and all that. But anyway, we're pommies. But at least we're scientists too. You're
a scientist, and you've paved the way for us. And we're still so new at this, and I think that's why we need to be listening to our scientists, and colleagues from the UK and the US, and where you're really leading the charge. Well, we've got a bit to catch up on at the moment. We've got more studies that are planned and will be announced, I guess, in the coming 6 or 12 months, which is really exciting, which is wonderful on different treatment conditions. But at the moment, I think ours is the only show on the road, and I am by no means an expert. And to get that tag sometimes is not a comfortable position for me. So I think we would very much value your perspectives here.
Well, yes, I was supposed to be there last November and the November before, but COVID put an end to that.
COVID put the kibosh on a lot of things, Dave. So I think, it'll be interesting time.
Let me ask you a bit about Indigenous peoples. Is there any interest there? Is there any sort of history that we're learning now about the value of these entheogens and Indigenous populations?
For our Australian Indigenous?
Yes,
I'd love to know more about that, actually. I've spoken with Entheogenesis Australis of that. The difficulty is the fact that we don't have much in the way of fossilized kind of evidence in that regard. But given our flora has such, there's so much psychedelic compound, in our natives. There are people that I've spoken to that are almost certain that there was some ingestion of psychedelic substances. Certainly for us, it's important that in terms of our own team, we want to acknowledge and have even in view our own healing space of, where we do our treatment. So for us, it's really important that we have symbols of Indigenous healing within our treatment space.
Well, absolutely. And the healing power of these, it'd be interesting if you could use psychedelics to heal that, the awful legacy of earlier community.
Oh, my God. And there is so much that white settlement did to our Indigenous and continued, with the stolen generation. I mean, the list could go on. And, to go further and to appreciate their spirituality, actually, and to understand the dreaming and even in our own. So in our room, we have this beautiful Indigenous artwork about, what was a walk in the dream, which looks quite cosmic and beautiful and almost a bit psychedelic in and of itself.
Well, indeed, you do wonder, don't you? There are remarkable similarities between Indigenous art and DMT experiences. Yes.
Well, this is it.
How could they not be related? Then you think it would be.
And I think it's that makes sense to us. For us, in particular, I'll send you a picture of this artwork. You would swear it's psychedelic. It's beautiful.
Please do.
And but for us, in part of our musical playlist, we actually commence. It's on its fourth iteration now, our St. Vincent's playlist. But we start with a Pitjantjatjara man singing about ancestral creation in the dream time. And that signifies the beginning of their journey. And then after,
how lovely.
Music. And then right at the end, about maybe 6 hours in, there's a pause and then he sings again to sort of signal the end of the journey as well. So for us, it's sort of very much about viewing this with an Australian and Aboriginal Indigenous feel to this because it's so important. We think that there's incredible healing and wisdom in.
It's the least you can do, isn't it?
Well, I think there's such wisdom in their spirituality and their lineage. So, yeah, I think for us, very, very important that we acknowledge their contribution in that way.
Before we finish, I want to go back to your CV and talk to you. You were a youth psychotherapist as well.
I am.
There's this very interesting tension. Which is, if there's one area where there is still tension between what you might call the sort of progressives or the idealists and the reactionaries, it's over psychedelics in young people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of the opinion psychedelics potentially could be extraordinarily powerful in helping young people make sense of the chaos we've left for them. I don't know what you think.
Well, I received, I get all sorts of weird and wonderful mail, which I'm sure you would too, but I received an email from a gentleman who was in his 70s, and he said, I just want to write to you to say thank you so much for what you're doing for Australia, blah, blah, blah. I was treated with LSD as a young man, and this is when it was back, used.
Yeah, illegal.
Yeah, quite legal. And he said he had several sessions of it as a very confused young man, as he was 17, 18, really struggled with, kind of finding his purpose in life and was quite an angry young man and whatever else. He said he had about 7 doses of it. He said that's all he needed. And it really made him get a really good sense of what he was doing, grounded him, and then helped him move through life. He said, I'm a proud father, grandfather. I owe what my life has turned out to be to those early experiences with LSD because I would have gone in a completely different direction. And I guess, and I get this question, all the time, what do you, what else do you see for psychedelics? I do see it as potentially having a role in psychological wellness, not just disorder. I don't know if I've ever seen a pair of eyes that have not demonstrated some degree of existential ache. And, this is very good for existential syndrome. And again, I'm not going to say it's good for everyone in that there are certain people that won't do well on psychedelics. I understand that. But I think as a God, that time of life is really confusing. And like,
indeed,
what do I do with my life, and who the hell am I, and and what sort of a world are we, trying to navigate in, and it's incredibly
overwhelming, isn't it?
It is,
especially as hasting to destruction.
Exactly, and it's kind of your first existential transition. Who the hell am I, and what am I going to do with my time on this little blue planet? I've worked so hard to be this and, got good grades. Now I'm in university, got a crippling depression because I don't actually think I wanted to do this. I think my parents wanted me to do this. What the fuck do I do now? Which is common. It's a very common script. So, it's certainly got utility there in terms of understanding who am I and what am I doing here and where do I feel alive and most alive in this thing we call life.
Well, Marge, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you, and I'm sure that once you've dealt with palliative care, deal with traumas of adolescence and growing up, I can think of no better person to do that. But thank you for talking to me. It's been a real delight. And
Thank you. Thank you. It's been lovely talking with you.
Sorry I destroyed your evening, but we're very grateful that you were able to keep going so long.
I'm going back to bed now. I've got about 5 cups of tea in me, so I might be awake for a while. But thank you. It's been lovely to chat with you.
Lovely to talk to you. Thanks, Mark.
Bye now.